my mother introduced my dad to Malcolm X, who lived around the block in Detroit. I grew up in a polygamous family that was formed in the US, but then moved back to Egypt. Way back between like the ages of 6 or 8 until like I was maybe 10 or 12. My babysitter was molesting me. There were times I was like laughing and on the ground, rolling around like hysterically and crying all at the same time because just all of these emotions were coming out.
Okay, I think we're good.
All right.
We're rolling. Sweet. Well, thanks for being here.
Thanks for the invite.
I didn't eat my breakfast today, so I might eat while we talk a little bit.
Please,
if you don't
feel
mind.
free.
But how's it going?
Man, it's been quite a week. Like family stuff going on, but everybody at this point is safe and comfortable, and yeah. So
oh wow,
it's really
is there a problem with their safety?
Potentially, but it's all resolved.
Do you have a big family?
I do. I have a blended family. So, my mother got remarried, so I've got my step family as well. My father's side of the family, we all of the cousins grew up at certain times in 4 homes on a street in Detroit called Woodingham. And so all the siblings, all the cousins, I just say siblings off the top, but all the cousins kind of grew up like siblings. So we're all super close, even to this day. So yeah, we've just got a lot of folks to keep track of.
Wow.
Which is great if we can, whenever we're able to get like a large number of us together, it's really cool.
So was that fun growing up like that, or does it get overwhelming, or do you get lost in the crowd? Because my family was pretty small, I think, so I had a very different experience, I'd say.
It was fun, but I think also was, my parents broke up, maybe I was 2 years old or something like that, 3 years old, something around that age. My father moved back to the US, and we were in Malta and Tunisia. So then coming back to Detroit later on, passing through Atlanta, we didn't have all that continual constant connection, but then when we were, it was like a family reunion. And for however many days we were visiting, it would be like, depending on whose house we were in, that's who would feed us, clothe us, beat us, whatever we needed. And it would be all the cousins.
You said feed us, clothe us, beat us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is before the new, kinder, gentler, non-traumatic parenting.
Sure. You just said it so casually.
It happened casually.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think that was helpful?
The beatings?
Yeah.
Or I think when they were not just reprisals, but when there was an explanation of what was wrong, and what should have been done differently. I actually, in those terms, it feels like those were the times where it was helpful. But in reality, I think it wasn't that the beating was helpful. I think it was that the actual just sitting down and explaining what the issue was what was helpful. Which, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And the beating was just this punctuation, this kind of punishment. I saw somebody talking about his son finding these limestone rocks and starting to do drawings with them because they were like chalk on the sidewalk and on the asphalt, and it was really cool. And he gradually moves from the asphalt to the car, and then he's makes these beautiful designs on the car, and the dad's like about to lose his shit, and then he realizes this is just a logical progression. It's making beautiful artwork. He doesn't know that it's something that's going to be damaging to the car, and so it wasn't. It was a mistake. It wasn't misbehavior. It wasn't, some kind of maladaptive desire to destroy something. And so he was able to like calm himself down and be like, that is a beautiful picture. Never do it again. And I think that's a kind of where we need to kind of be. Because a lot of times we are physically punishing our kids for doing things that make sense. From that child's point of view, that are not really, that are not rebellion, that are not misanthropic actions. They're just mistakes because that child doesn't know how the world works yet, and so it's our job to then teach that child how the world works, so that they're able to work within in that framework.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I should have been beaten. I got in so much trouble and was so out of control. And my poor parents, they just didn't know how to handle me.
Yeah.
And they never beat me, although I totally deserved it at some times for sure. So your family dynamic, was everybody getting along?
Gosh. So I grew up in a polygamous family that was formed in the US, but then moved back to Egypt.
Oh, wow.
And back to the Middle East or North Africa specifically. And like understood the workings of the system of the United States of America. And thus, at one level, there's the idea of, well, what can we do to fight against it, to correct it? And then there's the other idea of best thing to just get everybody out and be able to build in an environment that's more welcoming, that's more culturally appropriate. But the problem is that every country has its shit and its own levels of corruption, even if it's not a system that is there to crush you based upon your race. It may be based upon your class or your lack of connections to the military or what have you. The political ideology of the mayor of your neighborhood, those types of things. Those types of things are how societies and places are divided in a lot of places, including North Africa and the Middle East. So we were never in an environment that was fully conducive, and I don't know if there is such a thing. But because we were there as multiple households of a very large family, and there were some larger figureheads who, I guess, kind of fell into this control position. There was also this, not quite cultish, maybe. I don't know. I wasn't an adult at the time, so it's hard to assess. But in retrospect, I can see that there was definitely this, a couple of central figures who did have that gravitas and charisma, and we're like, no, we need to do this. We need to, build in this way, and didn't necessarily have the best interest of everybody at hand. They liked their power, and they liked the wealth that came out of that. And some folks in retrospect were wary of it, but other folks not necessarily so much so. And so actually when my parents broke up, my father went to the States, and the rest of us, his brothers, my mom, my cousins, were at that time in Malta, and then moved to Tunis later. But they were supposed to be sending money back to the families overseas. And there's one uncle who was, collecting it all and then sending it back. But instead of sending it back, he was, partying away and drinking, and he used it all up in the U.S. And so we never got it. So my dad thinks that the family is being taken care of, and me and my cousins, we would go door to door with my brothers, go door to door with my youngest uncle, who was like 12 years older than I am. So the same age difference that my brother and I have is the age difference between my uncle and myself. And so he would lead all the shorties door to door, just asking for food and for handouts. And it's a Middle Eastern country, so everyone understands the necessity to take care of the neighborhood and to take care of the people in your environment. So it was, as far as I know, it was never an issue, but it was definitely an issue for the family, especially for my mother's side of the family when they found out what happened. And that kind of caused a schism because they held my father responsible, even though he wasn't aware of what was happening.
Wow. How old were you when this was all happening?
Between like 3 and 5.
Do you remember any of it?
I don't. I remember being in Tunis. I remember being with my brothers and cousins and such, but I don't remember that was the circumstance. You're a kid and you're just out. And I remember playing in the dirt. I remember collecting snails. And my mom told me about how she would always have to I've come in the house with pockets full of snails and dirt, and she would have to strip me down, take me back out into the courtyard and hose me down, and then take all the snails out of my pocket and then have to wash my pants. But that was a daily thing.
So I'm confused a little bit. This is in Tunisia, not in Detroit.
Correct. This was in Tunisia.
So were you born in the States, or?
I was born in the States, but I was only here for 2 months, and then we moved. I guess it was like the anchor baby thing, so that I could be born with as a U.S. citizen in the U.S.
Oh, okay.
But my mom was a U.S. citizen, so I could probably have had U.S. citizenship born abroad. If I had not been, but now I can become president. Yeah, right.
I might write you in, man. We'll see you later.
Hey, ish 2024. But
what a mess.
So yeah, so there's that schism. There's also a history of addiction, and I think maybe part of this journey of let's leave this country was also to leave the environment that made that so easy and maybe necessary. But the thing about addiction is, even if you change people and places, you still have to deal with the issue of connection or lack of connection. That's not something that people really understood about addiction at the time so much. And I think that, that kind of made it really difficult, especially later on. Like, for instance, one of my uncles passed away, and that was a huge trauma and stressor for my father, who was very much he's the oldest son, as was I the oldest son, and he was parentalized, as was I to a certain level, but not the same level that he was. He was severely parentalized, which meant that the parents could be anywhere in the world, and he was taking care of all of his brothers. So I think that when his brother died, he very much blamed himself in a lot of ways, and it had nothing to do with him. It was an epileptic seizure that it went on, and there were complications, and he passed.
Oh, sorry.
But
so there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. Oh man, there's tons.
Wow, I'm having a hard time following, to be honest, because we have your family dynamic where there's, and so this is within the family that there's these kind of abuses of power.
Yes.
In this polygamist kind of structure, familiar family structure that you guys had, and then within that there's addiction.
There's addiction. There was also war, and that when we moved to Egypt, we were there we got there June, so 2 months, July, August, right? And then September, October, is the October War, when Syria and Egypt were fighting against Israel, and then Israel started bombing Cairo. And no matter how much they say they don't bomb civilian centers, they hit maybe 4 buildings down, and we had to get out of there. And so then we moved to Beirut in time for the Lebanese Civil War.
Wow.
So we had that. So for those years, we were just running from place to place. And then parents break up. And then we go back to the US, and having blamed my father for what happened in Tunis, or the fact that we were barely surviving financially, at least, my grandparents came ostensibly to visit. But when we went to the airport, they had, my grandmother was connected with law enforcement. So 2 plainclothes Detroit police officers with guns held down my father and then escorted myself and my mother to the gate for the plane flying to Detroit. So they put us on the plane with my grandparents, and they basically kidnapped us back to Detroit and threatened my father if he were to contact us without first getting permission, or try to see us without getting permission from the grandparents. And so,
but this is because they were blaming your father for all the financial hardships.
Exactly.
But it wasn't his fault.
It wasn't his fault.
Wow.
And I think they kind of worked that out in fairly short shrift. But I know that, like, my uncle told me this a couple of years back. 1 year I went to a public school in Detroit, and so I was 6 years old. First grade, and it was fairly close to my home. And my cousin Lorenzo, who I think his father was a police officer, and so he would patrol. He patrolled the riverfront area, which is where we lived at the time in this project, and I went to the school there. And so because he didn't feel like he could come by and visit without having to go through my grandparents, he would just take his patrol car and stop at the school and just do a walk around the school, and would stop by my classroom window and just watch me. And he'd want to go in and say hi, but he didn't want to
this was
cause any.
Who again?
Anyways, this was my cousin Lorenzo.
Your cousin?
His father.
Okay. Wow.
And so it was at that time where, my father was in and out of Detroit, my uncles were there. And so when the family was getting together, we would all be over there on Whittingham in those 4 homes, for a long weekend or on vacations or what have you. And then at times where there was less of that schism that had been created by my grandparents blaming my father, then, we could be there for days on end.
Is this kind of family dynamic common in the Middle East, like polygamous family, or having all these different parties looking after the kids?
I think in a lot of places. I'm not sure about the polygamy aspect of it, but definitely having multiple generations, having aunts and uncles and cousins in a compound or a complex. In Tunisia, basically, you have multi-level dwellings that are walled off, and there's either a courtyard or it's all behind a wall. And if you have somebody gets married and more people join the family, you may actually add another level, and then everyone is in the same building. And a lot of Middle Eastern cultures build in that way, so that instead of you go over there, or a family breaks up and the family just gets larger and builds the dwelling up.
Yeah, it sounds like there was a lot of. It sounds like you were all fairly. It sounds like there was a lot of love there and a lot of people looking after you.
Yeah.
Even though there is a lot of drama, a lot of differing opinions, a lot of miscommunication, but at the same time, there's more love there with a bigger community, a family.
Yeah, and it all even down to like, again, the addiction, the war, all of that, there was always this undercurrent of a lot of adults there trying to take care of the kids, and adults knowing that if there wasn't enough food, then the kids were going to eat first.
Yeah.
And that type of ethos is kind of been passed down to me, just through those experiences, as well as through things that my father, my mother, my uncles, aunts have said and talked about as I've grown up.
And living in such a different way, I could see how it'd be difficult to live here in the States. Was there any like culture shock there? Like, how did you navigate that?
I don't know if I navigated it very well. I was the weird kid. When I came, I was like about 5, so I entered first pre-kindergarten and then kindergarten. The pre-kindergarten was cool because it was this Afrocentric program where they taught kids Swahili, and it was a school that was run by friends of my mother. And so it was kind of just an extension of family. But when I got into real school, I didn't really speak much English. And so I think kids read me as an African-American kid, but I didn't sound like it. And I hadn't learned African-American culture. And so communication was difficult. Reading was difficult. I mean, I could read the letters, but just the English language, because it's not very phonetic, and it's this hodgepodge. It was really rough. And this is the grades where you're supposed to have good reading comprehension. You're developing that, and the teacher's asking you to read things. My mom would ask me to read to her at home as an exercise and just a thing to do together. And it was so frustrating because I remember there was a series of books called Sweet Pickles, and it was like these animals, these anthropomorphized animals in the forest having their adventures and such. And there's always a kind of a comedic end to it. And I was like, Mom, why are they always late? And she's like, what do you mean they're late? I said, look, see, in this part, they say they all lagged. No, they laughed. No, see, L-A-U-G-H, lag. I said, no, that's not lag, that's laugh. But I was like, I was so frustrated. There's no F there. How is it laugh? So I think the linguistic part was difficult, and that it kind of created this bubble of naivete around me because I didn't really understand what other people were thinking or saying much of the time until at least for that first year. I think when I was 6, my understanding was much better, but I had a lisp, or I had developed a lisp, which I ended up going to speech therapy for. But the weird thing is that I had a lisp of the letter S. I would talk like that, but only in English. In Arabic, I had no problem pronouncing any of those same S letters. So it was definitely a psychological thing. And so my mom started me in speech therapy as well as psychotherapy. And
how old were you around this time?
I started psychotherapy around 4.
Wow.
Maybe 5, and then speech therapy when I was 6.
So your parents are very progressive.
Very much so. Very much so.
Interesting.
Or my mom. My mom.
And she was American?
And she knew that, like, in that transition back to the U.S., especially like going from living with all of these cousins and uncles and like tons of people around to just it being me and her, or me and her and my grandmother, that I became very isolated, and she had to work and go to school, so like she had me when she was 18, so I had to just take care of myself, like play with myself, read books. I had, a Winnie the Pooh who was my best friend, and the linguistic thing, I think also like made it very difficult to like connect with other kids until maybe I was like 6 or 7, and then was starting to make friends like in my neighborhood or around, and even then it was like I was the laughing stock because of my accent, and that I looked and acted so weird. Maybe I didn't look weird enough to act and sound as weird as I was.
Yeah, I wanted to backtrack a little bit, and you touched upon what I was going to ask is, can you like go over what do you remember about the Middle East, and how did that experience of being in Detroit, then moving to the Middle East and survive and going through all of this war, how did that affect you?
I think that the biggest trauma was actually being separated from the family. Like for me, the memories of the Middle East were just being in one place and then like being in another. But I was always surrounded by family, and there was always food, and there was always there's always people around, and they're either talking to each other or talking to me, or like, so I didn't really, and also we were running from war, so we didn't really, it wasn't like Gaza. We didn't have buildings dropping on us, primarily because the time where it could have happened, they missed us. But so we were very lucky, like as refugees in that time and place, like we weren't getting shot at most of the time. We weren't being bombed most of the time. So it was fairly idyllic, actually. So it was really the separation from that, I think. And also, I think because my parents were traumatized through that experience, then I had that secondary trauma through them, because I could feel this like angst and anxiety sometimes, like being with them, but I didn't necessarily associate it with the goings on or the places that I was in, which I think is why, like in recent years, I've been going back a lot, because I've felt that once I came to the U.S., I stayed in the U.S. and never went back to the Middle East. Yeah. And I felt that as a huge disconnect and a huge missing, longing, because I think all the trauma that I experienced it felt more like familial trauma than it felt like trauma to do with like what happened there. So like going back to Beirut, there's still parts of the city that they've left with, the pockmarks from the bullet holes from the Civil War. But it doesn't, I'm not triggered by any of that. I feel at home.
Perhaps like the political situation in the war is just like an indirect kind of coloring of the familial experience. Yeah. I find that's the case with me. And I'm just getting in touch with the idea of ancestral trauma, generational trauma, which I never thought was a thing, to be honest. Like my parents luckily escaped the Khmer Rouge war Khmer Rouge genocide in Cambodia. But, anybody who's Cambodian today, it was only one generation ago that there was this massive genocide there. Yeah. So every single Cambodian alive today has been affected by it, either by their parents or some relative. And, it didn't happen to me. And I didn't think it would affect me. I grew up fairly comfortably in the States. Yeah. But I'm now seeing that through my meditation practices and my spiritual practices, that like, oh, this shit is heavy. Like it's coming up. Yeah. And I never knew it was there. And my parents never talk about it. And it carries those like political situations, those indirect traumas carry over into the familial life, for sure.
Yeah, very much so.
So what was next after like growing up in the States? Like how did you find your way, or like what led you onto the path that you're on now?
I think initially, and it's funny, like kind of, I consider myself like a half generation immigrant because I was born here, but then ended up like growing up there and then moving back here, and my mom's American. So coming back here, having to learn English, having to then also like growing up in Detroit, then learning Black English, and learning what it was to be African American, because I'm definitely also African American. My mother was deeply involved, both my parents and the Panthers, and basically through my mother. My mother introduced my dad to Malcolm X, who lived around the block in Detroit.
Oh wow!
And then later on, my mother got involved in one of the support groups for the African National Congress in South Africa, supporting their struggle against apartheid. So, like, I was a Panther Cub.
Wow!
And for me, my mom always put it this way: like, she would say that her job is to, put food on the table and to get me into the best scholastic situation. And like, I always wanted to be a paper boy. I always wanted to like have my own money, and I always like not have to ask for allowance or not have to ask my mom to buy things if I wanted something. And maybe it was the feeling like of like knowing that sometimes she'd be able to say yes, but a lot of times it would be a no. And like to have my own money and be able to just, it would be a yes whenever it was. But she was like, that's time out of your actual job, and your actual job is to study and to learn and to get good grades, so that, because we don't have money to pay your way through life. So it's going to have to be on achievement. And so, that first year where my uncle used to like sneak into, well, he didn't sneak, he was a police officer. So, and that was his beat. So he would just spend more time at my school. From that point, I was in private schools the whole time. And like I said, we didn't have money. So we had financial aid. I had financial aid from second grade through the rest of my life. And that meant my mom had to sign a lot of paperwork, had to also like make certain arrangements, and knew just how to work the hustle so that she could have access to all these scholarship funds in order to get me into like the best possible schools in the area. And so, I lived in Detroit, then went to school in Redford, and then lived in Detroit, and then went to school in Ann Arbor for high school, and which is like 45 minutes away. And no, actually Bloomfield, then Redford, then Ann Arbor. So like in all these like far off suburbs, right? And then I would come back home to Detroit, and on the weekends I would hang out at my grandfather's house because my mom had to work and study. And so most of my friends were actually at my grandfather's house, not at my own house, which was cool, but also it kind of also contributed to that isolation where during the week I'm studying. Sometimes I would get outside after homework, but then I had local friends in my neighborhood, but I'd be gone for like weeks at a time. And then they'd say, where have you been? I was homework. So homework. Got into the Claremont colleges, which are, some people used to call them the West Coast Ivies. And also having grown up in Michigan in the US, like the idea of coming to LA where I didn't have to chip the ice off the car before we drove to school. So I was like, all right, bye Michigan. So I came out here, and, coming from this mixed family, with African Americans, North Africans, Thais, being in college, I finally started to be able to be around folks from these groups who are not members of the family, and kind of understanding that like Thais and Blacks were not necessarily the same race, even though like in our family we kind of are. and that there are all these different types of Arabs, and some that look like me, and some that look like they're from Switzerland or what have you. And so I started kind of understanding my place, or the strangeness of my place in the world, and what it meant to be, I guess, what we call now a third culture kid. That was partially because of my upbringing, but also partially because of just the mixed nature of the family.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you have so many different cultures. You're like third, fourth, fifth culture.
Right? Right. And so that really motivated me to want to learn more, and also I think to want to be understood by others. Because I finally started making friends, I had friends in school, but, and some of my oldest friends, like I'm still in contact with from first and second grade, but the friends I made in college were like really very foundational in life and very much lifelong. So to be able to be understood by these folks, I had to construct and start to understand myself, and like persona is kind of like how we interface with other people. It's not who we are, but it's how we present ourselves. And sometimes they're very carefully constructed, and sometimes they're just like haphazard. And so when we move to a new place, sometimes we recreate that. And I don't even know if I really had much of a persona, because I wasn't interfacing with very many people like on that really close personal level. I mean, I know I did, but it just feels like I didn't. And going through school, like being parts of these communities, I started to realize that there was something wrong, and that there was more to my lack of ability to interface with folks than just like being isolated, the language trauma, like the wartime experience, or like addiction in the family. And I never really knew what it was.
How did you know there was something wrong?
It was like especially like with because I was raised Muslim, and very strict upbringing. So I didn't date. Interactions with the opposite sex were basically in school or family members, and just friends, and that's that. So then when I did start like meeting women and being interested, there was this, and part of it was of course inexperience, and nobody really explains these things to you growing up, or at least they didn't used to really, at least, especially when you have this kind of sexual repression in your culture. But there was this like overcautiousness and lack of ability to understand what was expected. And it was weird, but not, it didn't become a huge problem, because I felt I wasn't really that super invested. I was still like about getting good grades and graduating, and but it definitely started to, I realized that I was just different. But years later, like when I'm 36, and I'm in this relationship with a woman who's one of my best friends now, it comes up, like the memories come flooding back, that way back between like the ages of 6 or 8 until like I was maybe 10 or 12, my babysitter was molesting me.
Oh, wow.
And it was this long-term thing that was just kind of part of the way we rolled. And I didn't know that there was anything wrong with it, but at the end, I realized that when the memories came back, that there was one instance where I got totally freaked out.
Wow.
And I think that's when it stopped, because she was scared that I would tell, or something along those lines. I'm not quite sure.
Oh, wow.
And like, it was a really rough relationship, and I was really acting out in a lot of ways. I was very passive aggressive. I would lie a lot. We would be together and break up, be together and break up. I never really wanted to commit to being in a relationship.
This is with your relationship when you were around 36?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
And part of that, I also now realize in retrospect, had to do with, being raised in this non-monogamous milieu, in a non-monogamous culture, and not being exposed to all of the expectations of monogamy until like maybe seeing romance movies or Disney or what have you. But that didn't get so internalized because I saw this family structure of me and 5 parents who all got along great, at least with regards to raising the children, and that regardless of whether there was a divorce or not, we could all be at the same place at the same time, eating the same food, and talking about how to handle problems and how to move the family forward. And so I think that the idea of like being with one person, or just even the assumptions that most Americans make about, well, I found this person that I like, and that's the one person. They just weren't in me. And I didn't, there was part of me that understood and part of me that didn't. And I think the part of me that understood was trying to keep the part of me that didn't from understanding. And so there was this like self-delusion that was also going on, so that I would always avoid relationship talks, because I think part of me knew that relationship talk meant that person wanted to make it this monogamous thing, whereas that just didn't make sense to me. And like, this is in retrospect, but I'm sure like for the people who I was like with up to that point, they're like, why is this person, oh, they're afraid of commitment, they're afraid of this, that. And it wasn't that I was afraid of commitment, I was afraid of that specific form of like cutting herself off from connection. But again, I didn't have the words, I didn't have the understanding, or at least in a concrete way where I knew that I knew it. But there was definitely a part of me that knew it, that was trying to get the other part of me to not understand it, because it allowed me to continue to act out. It was the only kind of survival mechanism that I had to be able to be myself, was to just avoid those relationship conversations.
I see.
Altogether.
So you still believe in polygamy now? Or are you a polygamist now? Or
I would say for me, I think it's polyamory or non-monogamy.
Okay.
Yeah, because I like polygamy or polygyny has this hierarchical sense to it, where a man can have multiple wives or multiple woman partners, but a woman does not have the same equality. And I don't find that to be conscionable.
Yeah.
So for me, if I want a freedom, then I think those who I deal with deserve to have the same freedom. And that's just my ethical standpoint. So that takes me from being polygamous to being non-monogamous / polyamorous. Like if we're gonna put the labels on. So there was this not knowing of who I was, plus this not trusting of relationship in general because of the isolation, because of the molestation, and then specific my partner at the time was a very strong person and very strongly presented, fiery, angry at the time, and so like that fire and that anger definitely like recalled that sense of being in a circumstance where my voice didn't count and I couldn't speak up for myself. but through that, I also realized that I was just a fucking people pleaser and that I had never learned to speak up for myself, and I had never learned to confront constructively. And this is why, all of my survival techniques were about avoiding the conflict, avoiding the conversation. And I think that's like, especially for folks of, let's say, Eastern cultures in general, Asian, Arab, North African, and some African cultures are very much about saying things in ways that are pleasing and non-confrontational, and kind of dealing with things on the periphery, or even just sweeping things under the rug in order to maintain a certain harmony rather than confrontation here.
You think that's indicative of Eastern cultures or Western cultures?
Eastern cultures.
Eastern.
And I think, like, living in a Western culture, that ends up being very hampering. And I think also, like, in many cases within Eastern cultures, it's also hampering of really coming to deeper understandings and deeper healing that could happen if we actually talked about things in more direct ways, or at least in more open ways. I think some of the softness is definitely helpful and necessary. And that the way that we hold truth in the West, we hold it as a bludgeon. And it's like, my telling of the truth is more important than who you are as a person. And I'm going to smack you in the head with it. So I think there's a balance that can be had to it. So it's not that one system is better than the other necessarily, but that both need to happen in certain ways in certain times.
Okay, so there's like a lot of things that I want to unpack here. First of all, was there any consequences for the person who molested you when you were a child?
No.
They were never, prosecuted or caught or anything?
No, it was like 30 years later when I even had started having the recollections of the occurrences.
Oh, wow. So it was those memories were all repressed? They
were all repressed.
Wow.
Yeah. So part of my diagnosis is like dissociative fugue. And so, like, I experience losses of time. Sometimes people are erased from my memory. And sometimes I'll meet them again and they'll be like, hey, how's it been going? Like, who? Oh, and they'll mention like somebody who we all hung out with and something that we all did together. And then they'll start to kind of come into focus. And it's not necessarily been that person was traumatic, but maybe something connected to something connected to something connected to that person, like resonated.
Cognitive disassociation.
And so dissociative amnesia, dissociative fugue, are things that, to this day I deal with. I will have like conversations disappear, and then sometimes false memories will subsume into their place, so that there's like some kind of filler. And sometimes it takes some going back and forth with the person who is in those memories in order to like realize that no, your brain just made that shit up,
I had another podcast guest who also has similar experiences through his own traumas, particularly through his suicide attempt. Do you think there's like any spiritual significance to disassociation? Are you a very spiritual person?
I consider myself to be, yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is, again,
it's
we're
both,
talking
for sure. Yeah,
it's both, but I think that's
could be
what we all three, mind, body, spirit. It's all very much one enmeshed thing, and it's hard to, not even possible really, to differentiate all of them in all cases. But I do think that, and maybe that's now in my training from a Jungian point of view, I have this lens and this language to talk about these things.
Yeah.
And when we look at things that we would call neuroses or problems, let's say, one of the first questions we ask is, well, what was your soul in need of? What was your soul searching for that it did that? What did your spirit require, rather than why is something wrong with you? Because it's not. It's we are very well functioning machines, and these machines can survive under extreme loads of stress, but they must reconfigure in order to do so. And so I had to reconfigure, my memories had to reconfigure, my whole reality had to reconfigure in order for me to be able to move forward. And I think just from that young age, dealing with all of that, it was just too much. But then also not being able to learn about it or deal with it or learn to deal with it over those years, it stayed too much for a very long time, until I got into that relationship where it was really confrontational, but I really wanted to be in that relationship. And then I also really didn't want to be in that relationship. So there's the internal confrontation in the relationship, but it was also my longest relationship. Regardless of the off and on and the back and forth. And I think that was one of the greatest aspects of my healing, or at least the jump point, because I was in it, I was working it. And that's what I really needed, to then start building the strength and the both the physical and spiritual and the ego strength to sit there and understand these things that were too difficult for a child to learn. Later on, I met this woman, and we, talked for a little bit, and it didn't quite work out. And then later on, because this was kind of right after, she was like, "Yeah, it felt like you were emotionally stunted." and she's like, "I shouldn't have said that. That was a really horrible, judgmental thing to say." And I was like, "No, that was accurate as fuck." Because that early trauma made my psyche make sure to avoid all kinds of confrontation. I've always been a great mediator. I've always been the person who makes sure to take care of things, make sure that everybody's okay, so that nobody's flaring up, nobody's going crazy. And it's become a skill. And I realize now, looking back, that it's because there are all these things that I couldn't handle, and that through not growing through a process of learning how to handle these things, it was just total avoidance of these things for 30 years.
So what I was trying to get at with the whole spiritual thing was just wondering where your disassociation, where these episodes come from. There's it's kind of reminds me of the nature and nurture, nature versus nurture argument. Do you think it's in part just of all the trauma, all the difficulties you had growing up, or is there something deeper? Which it sounds like you're already in touch with, and you're already familiar with, and you've done a lot of exploring and investigation on your own. But it just reminds me of a session that I had with my therapist, where when I first started getting into my spirituality, and I started to see this ancestral trauma that I have within me, and all the reasons why I had depression growing up, because I was never abused, I was never mistreated, I was never had any trauma, but I had this overwhelming depression, and I never had any idea of where it came from. And what was interesting, one thing that she said that I found was interesting was she asked me why do you need to know why? Because some people will go through life just treating what they already have. Yeah. And then I think there's others like myself and you, it sounds like you as well, who have a desire for some serious, extreme self-examination to get to the bottom of it. Yeah. And I feel like that's necessary to really, at least in my own experience, to really understand oneself and to heal without the use of medication or something, instead of treating the symptoms, really getting down to the source, which is much harder for sure. But do you agree, or what has your experience been like?
I've always thought that that root cause analysis, basically, talking in IT terms, is is necessary to be able to really solve the problem. And then understanding that empiricism is not the be all and end all. So just because you see things and you hear a phenomenon doesn't necessarily mean that that's the actual root cause. And so to really be open to the different layers of reality, the different aspects of the body, both the physical body and the subtle body, and the way that energy flows. I think it's extremely important to be open and understanding that all of these things exist in this like Venn diagram type overlap. And I think maybe like sitting back into, I guess, a more spiritually, maybe even less cause and effect like way of looking at it. I think that it's like if you look at maybe the Vedic understanding of reality, that we are in this common existence where we are basically all one and connected. But the way that we see ourselves and see each other is through this illusion, this Maya. And that is also how we interface with one another. That's also like where the canvas upon which we paint our personas, and the canvas upon which our feelings are drawn, and that we get to identify with those, or we get to, like you said earlier, watch them and not identify with them. But that choice is something that we have to make, but we can only make that once we realize that Maya is Maya. But Maya is not just there to be a pain in the ass. It's how we interact. It's how we associate. It's part of what allows us to be connected. And that connection is necessary to who we are as human animals. And so I think that Maya was doing its job, and it was able to present what needed to be presented and hide what needed to be hidden, to allow me to, like, because if I had really had to bear all that at that age, I may have been even more isolated, like more so than just the circumstances. Because when I was around people, then I was with people. It's just I didn't have the option to be around people a lot of the time, and so I was in myself. But when I got around people, my mom would take me to parties, to jazz clubs, to like late night stuff all the time, because this is what she was doing at that age, and anything that she could go to, there was the restriction of, well, I've got this kid I've got to watch. So if she could, she would just bring me along. And I was there, very gregarious, very like personable, very adult as a young child. So I think that ability to interact with people and to interface and have that connection was facilitated by Maya, by the taking away of these realities that I was not able to deal with or able to process, maybe for longer than was helpful at the time, but I think it was necessary when it was necessary.
So you're taking some elements from Indian or Hindu religion. Do you, man, if I had more time, I think one of my life goals is to like learn about all the major religions. It's so fascinating to me. The older I get, especially as I kind of continue down this like spiritual path. What has your like, or what's your experience with religion? Because you grew up Muslim, and one question that I'm trying to like beat my way around and trying to navigate back towards what you were saying before is like those religions are so different. And for example, the cultural sexual repression within the Muslim religion, like where does that come from? So maybe let's just start there, because that's one thing that I want to get into, and then maybe how you've kind of been able to adopt all these things in your exploration from other cultures and religions.
That's a brilliant question. And I think for me, like, definitely I grew up Muslim and I still am Muslim, definitely. I think the more you learn about religions, the more you realize that they are just templates to explain the same thing. And so when you understand what prana is, then you can talk about chi. And you understand what chi is, and you can talk about ashe. And so some do better at explaining certain phenomena than others. So it's like looking at a large scale phenomenon and using classical mechanics, and then looking at micro scale, sub-micro scale phenomenon, and knowing that now you're going to use quantum mechanics. They explain the same reality, but one explains one point of view better than the other, and the other explains the other point of view better than the first. So I think that's why it's easy for me to talk about Maya and not feel like I'm leaving Islam or contradicting my own religion. But also one of the things that Islam says is that there was a prophet and there was a religion given to all peoples of the earth. And so, and we don't know what their names were in all cases. We know some of them, but we know that there was some divine revelation from God, from the Creator, to all of humanity. In different languages, different places, different times, different cultural contexts. And because of that, I think it's important to learn about different voices and different religious voices. Even in a lot of the Vedic tradition, like sometimes we call it a religion, but it's not really a religion. Like for instance, Buddhism is not really a religion. It's a cosmology. It's a philosophy. It's an understanding of maybe spirituality.
Yeah,
but
it's very scientific.
Yeah, it's very, very scientific.
Yeah,
and then you branch that out to like Ayurveda, like as a larger, or the Vedic tradition as a larger bubble, but with a whole bunch of different, like Jainism, Hinduism, like all of these, and the fact that Hinduism even it's like Shinto. It's not necessarily one codified thing. It's a whole bunch of different regional and like traditions that are related.
Yeah.
So by holding that space, my father, looks at the prana wheel and he's like, see those spokes? Like each of those is a different religion that is all leading to the same place. And you may not agree with the route, the angle that this spoke is taking, and this is the angle that you want to take, and that's fine, but you're all heading to source. And so we can't have that arrogance of, well, my religion, I am sure that my religion is the one true way. We can believe it, but we can't say that we know it. Even as a Muslim, I can't say that I know it. I can say that I have faith. And then to me, this is what Islam teaches. It teaches us to be less arrogant, to know that we are working on faith and that we're doing our best as humans, and so are other people. And if we're able to understand that, then we're also able to not see people who are different as the enemy, but to see them as brothers and sisters and siblings on the same path, or on the same trajectory, or different trajectories leading to the same place, and that maybe you need that view from over there in order to understand a certain something that wasn't taught to you. So that's how this kind of synergistic understanding has come. And also, like my father grew up in Nigeria for many years and got into a lot of the traditional African religions, like Ifa. And so Ifa also is a very open framework, spiritual system and religion that does not necessarily exclude the divinity or necessity of other religions. So yeah, it's always been kind of that understanding. And then the sexual repression, I think, like when people look at the Sirah, so the history of the Prophet Muhammad's life, and the things that people were doing, there really wasn't, like, there was a frankness, there was an ability to speak openly about sex, about medical issues, about everything. And like there are Islamic scholarly treatises about sex and different ways to satisfy your partner, and satisfying your partner is one of our obligations as Muslims who are married, right? And not being satisfied is grounds for divorce. So sexuality is actually within the scripture of Islam and in all of the source material is a huge thing, and is something that's very healthy for people to explore within certain boundaries. But I think, and I've read different histories that explain it in different ways, but either through like the expansion, but probably more so through the expansion of Western colonialism, where the Ottoman Empire falls and Sykes-Picot Agreement is created between the Western powers, and they start chopping up the Middle East, and they start chopping up North Africa, and they start signing different agreements with different parties in order to place them against each other. And then you have an anti-colonial backlash that in some cases is very progressive, and in other cases very regressive. And a lot of times in anti-colonial movements that have dealt with colonialism for a century, 2 centuries, 3 centuries, were in survival mode. So all of the lofty and beautiful ideas that we're able to hold in times of peace kind of get flattened to just the necessities of what has to be done. Okay, men have to protect women and children, and we're going to be on the front lines, and we need women to be the educators. And so like gender roles become stiffer because of the necessity. Just as gender roles in the Neolithic became defined in the first place because of the necessity to hoard grain and to start gathering wealth. And so we have, a certain group that we're going to have do more housework, and a certain group that we're going to have do more physical labor, because if we have this physically larger group doing more physical labor, then we can gather more grain, and then we can contribute to our hoards better. So I think it was that type of process that led to this, because Muslims, really until the colonial era, where we were seen as the freaks, we were seen as the, as the heathens that were really on the edge of sexual morality by Christians and Catholics and the West, because there's this openness and just the ability to talk about it and to be artful about it and to want to live beautifully through it, which was not part of the Western experience. Again, because of that imperialist, colonialist, really power structure that really took command after the Crusades. Yeah. So I think that's at least where that comes from in modern Islam, and you see it in the Wahhabi movement. You see it in the Ikhwan al-Islami, the Muslim Brotherhood movement in Egypt, and you see it in in Iran, in the Revolutionary Islamic Republic. That they are all these anti-colonial reactionary movements that are living through war, even though now it's peacetime. And I think that's one of the things that we all, as individuals, also have to watch out for when we're dealing with trauma. We have these ways that have helped us to deal with it, to survive. Yeah. But then once we're out of survival mode, we're stuck there. And that's why I didn't really start my healing until I was 36. And so now I'm 51, unmarried, no kids, because I couldn't establish a healthy relationship at that point.
That's so fascinating to me. Just hearing you kind of paint the whole picture this way and relating it to your own background with trauma, it just makes, this is like a very interesting perspective, and also makes a lot of sense to say that it's out of survival. Do you think there's a way out of that mentality, or are we always destined to be in this state of survival? And just from my perspective, from perhaps a Western perspective, is there's abuse there, you know, and there's a lack of women's rights.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's with the intention to protect women, but at the cost of taking away their rights at the moment in some places in the Middle East. Like, what do you think about that?
I mean, so it's so interesting because when you look at the history of Islam, equality, the ability to own property and to inherit, the ability to advocate for your own divorce, all of these things, like divorce period, all these things were brought to Islam. So at the time, Islam was feminism. Like feminism in the world from like 1400 years ago up until like basically the last crusade, feminism equaled Islam. And then you get into this protectionist reactionary thing, and it's like a totally different picture in some places. In other places, like not at all. Like, and that's funny because we think about the Middle East as Islam, but you and I know that most of the world's Muslims are Asian. That Indonesia is the world's like largest Muslim country. And so also part of that is this Orientalist mindset that the entire mediascape is placed in, that means that Islam equals Arab. And it doesn't. Even myself calling myself an Arab is an artifact of me being an Arabized Amazigh African, and that is expansion of the definition of Arab, going from being part of a racial group to being this ethno-linguistic community that all you have to do to join is to learn Arabic fluently or to be born speaking Arabic.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the branding there is on these cultures and religions. I mean, there's even Black Jews in Africa that nobody knows about or considers.
Exactly, like the Igbo are considered to be, plus the Jews in Ethiopia, which are, at least from the Israeli point of view, a lot more understandable. But yeah, I think that's part of it. And I think that you're really good at segues, maybe even not even realizing it, because like I see this resolution as part of a warrior tradition, because warrior traditions around the world have all found this common ideal of learning and understanding the arts and tactics of war, and then cleansing that through art, through self-expression, through internal exploration, and then being able to live functionally in society, contributing as warriors without having to be at war, both with yourself or with others. And you know, some societies have been better at it than others. I think Polynesian warrior culture has been much better at that than Japanese warrior culture, where you saw samurai being very abusive to peasants. But that is, you know, I think part of why, you know, the art that we do, capoeira, is also so healing in many ways. And it is that is kind of how I, you know, got into my profession, at least with regards to mental health, is realizing that these warrior traditions all have this way of taking our wartime experiences and processing them so that we can then live as warriors in peacetime without living at war in peacetime.
Yeah, do you feel like peace is even a thing? I kind of feel, you know, like I don't think that there's ever going to be an end of war, and it seems just to be a natural part of being human. It's just like the other side of the coin that has to play itself out. Like what's happening, like as hard as it is to realize, even like what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now is like kind of unavoidable in some ways.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think logistically it's avoidable, but I think humanistically it's unavoidable. But I do think that there are pockets of peace and times of peace and societies that are more at peace. But then those of us who have not processed our wartime experience and are still living through that war in those circumstances of peace end up bringing the war back.
Yeah.
As do the gaping holes in our souls that cause greed. Because once you're hungry, if you're just hungry but you feel like you're starving, right? We're just hungry. You haven't eaten in 3 hours, 4 hours, but you feel like you're starving. That might push you to steal from somebody in order to fill your stomach. But if you are at peace and you know that you're hungry, but you know that you're not starving, you know that there's no extreme actions that you need to take in order to sustain yourself, then you're just going to wait until you get home, or you're going to wait until you're able to pick some fruit, or to go fishing, or to hunt an animal, and then feed yourself. And I think that so much of humanity is sitting in their triggeredness, and as such, they need to find the most efficient and direct and short-term solution to filling their stomachs, or to filling their pockets, or to filling their bank accounts.
Yeah.
And I think that's where this relapse to war always comes from. It always comes from greed. It always comes from a need to dominate, because it's the quickest way to gain riches, to gain wealth, to gain control, to gain sustenance, right, at the bottom line.
And it's a story as old as time. Like, people have always been like that. It's so hard to expect people to be selfless and not short-sighted. Like, is that even possible?
Yeah, not everybody.
Just human nature.
I was literally having this conversation maybe 2 days ago with a dear friend, and we at the end of it were like, okay, so we've solved world problems, but the reality was, yeah, we just need a benevolent dictator who is powerful enough to subdue the entirety of humanity, but benevolent enough and to take care of all of us, so we don't have any needs. And then all that war could be quelled. But of course, that's an impossibility.
Has there ever been such a benevolent dictator?
No.
Is that even possible?
We have had empires that have been at that scale, but not global. They've just been at the scale of that empire, like the Mali Empire, for instance, is a good example for generations. But I think with Western hegemony, and it's interesting because we've had colonial empires, all around the world, but the ones that were the most successful, but also the most brutal, usually come from colder regions where there's just less, and you have to have extreme measures in order to aggregate and to gain that wealth and that sustenance. So,
all right, I want to kind of get to where you are today, and talk about some of the stuff that you have going on in your life. But first of all, so I know you're a mental health counselor. You're a mestre in Capoeira, and what, 10, 12 different languages?
Thereabouts, yeah.
And what else do you have going on?
And then I do IT work.
And you do IT work.
And that's, the job that's, paid the bills for so long. But, looking at that, so I've been a martial artist since I was about 4 years old. I started training with my parents. And then in 1991, I met capoeira. Okay. And it's this Afro-Brazilian martial art that, like a lot of classical martial arts, it incorporates a lot of aspects of the classical culture. So there's movement, there's music, there are the tactics, there's the situational awareness, there's the strategy of feinting and creating realities that are false in order to lure your opponent into traps and then trapping them, which end up being ways of learning how to survive in an asymmetrical warfare type of context. But when I kind of shortly after I got out of that relationship, I also started getting deeper and deeper into therapy. And like I said, I'd always kind of wondered why capoeira felt so healing. And I went on this retreat. It was by Male Survivor, which is an organization that does these recovery retreats, like 3 or 4 day recovery retreats for male survivors of sexual abuse. And they used a ton of different modalities. There was like the group talk therapy, there was smaller group talk therapy, but then there was tons of movement therapy, mindfulness eating, authentic movement, music therapy, and then sculpting and other aspects of theater of the oppressed. And they cracked me open. Like there were times I was like laughing and on the ground, rolling around like hysterically and crying all at the same time, because just all of these emotions that I had not really felt for most of my life were coming out, like either through realizations of my own story or hearing like these other 60 some odd men who had similar experiences share their stories and knowing that I was not alone in this. And so I realized that all of these cultural therapeutic modalities are just the aspects of classical culture, be it painting, be it music, be it the drum, be it dance. And there are ways that we connect with our bodies and our spirits and our minds, as well as with each other. And then I started doing research, and I found all of these evidentiary studies that show that these cultural practical therapies are extremely effective. And I was like, well, shit, these are all elements in capoeira, and they're all extremely effective therapies. No wonder people go to capoeira and they feel this euphoria, they feel this great connection, and then later on they go, back home to their wives or their boyfriends, or they go back to work and they start having the same the same arguments that they were having before. But while they were there in capoeira, they were doing great. And so then I started asking the question, well, how can we as capoeira teachers, because by that time I was teaching, how can we leverage that healing ability so that it's not just a one-time thing, it's not just palliative, but that it's something that we can use to help people grow their ability to be connected and to be healed going forward, not just in this training space and in the hada, but also outside in their lives. And that's something we talk about in capoeira, but I think we leave it up to the individual practitioner to figure out how they're going to implement the lessons of the hada in their lives. But if I'm a teacher of capoeira, I feel that at some level that's my responsibility. And I don't expect others to necessarily see it in the same way. But for me, that's how I saw it. So I started talking to some of my therapists and some of my mentors, including Ana Lately, who is in the Batuque family. She's a sambista from Rio. but she's also a therapist. And so, she's, when I told her of my discoveries and my desire to research how capoeira can be used clinically, she's like, "Oh, you probably need to go to Pacifica then." And that's this Jungian depth psychology institute in Carpinteria. And then my therapist said, "Yeah, Pacifica might be, because they are really into understanding how culture affects the psyche." And then somebody else is like, "You should go to Pacifica." And then I did a modality called Somatic Experiencing. And it allowed me to be able to center myself and be calm and to start having some of these constructive confrontational conversations. This is actually back when I was in that relationship. And at the end of like 2-3 months of this therapeutic modality, I was able to start having these conversations, and it started, creating more tumult, but I was able to handle it. And also, maybe a week after my last session, I went to the chiropractor because I'd always had these issues with my neck. Not always. It actually had started from an injury that I had dancing. So go to the chiropractor and pop, and he's like, "Whoa, we're gonna just be safe here and get you an X-ray, because there should not have been that much energy coming out of a crack in your neck." And so my spine had always been from the injury time until that had been just straight up and down. There's like an S curve that's supposed to be there, but it was like this. And so I was like, "Oh, this is just the injury. This is the best it's gonna get." Sometimes there was a reverse curvature. So the best is gonna get was the straight line. It was never gonna return to the S curve that is the healthy shape. Took the X-ray, and it was the perfect S curve. And he's like, "Have you been doing any exercises or any other therapies?" I'm like, I was doing somatic experiencing. And somatic experiencing, like any somatic modality, works on the understanding that a lot of our traumas are kept in the body, and different people's bodies keep different traumas in different places. And a lot of times you can also tell what the trauma was from where it is in your body. But in this case, a lot of the trauma that was released from my central nervous system and from my musculature was in the cervical vertebrae. And all of a sudden, because that was the only thing I'd done, and it fixed. So this psychotherapeutic modality fixed my back and my neck. What the hell?
Do you know what was stored there? Do you have any idea?
I don't, because there's just so much. But I think knowing that it's here, I think it had to do with my ability to speak up and feeling closed. It's at the same level as the throat chakra. And my people pleasing, my lack of ability to confront in a constructive way, or even at all, my passive aggressive tendencies and toxicity all came from that inability to just directly express myself and directly be who I am. So I really think that energetically that's what it was.
I have a similar experience actually that I'd like to share. Maybe I could get your feedback, especially as a mental health professional who has experience with it. But I've had this kink in my back for as long as I can remember, since I was a teenager at least. And I always thought it was because of playing guitar or even like boxing, because these are both like very asymmetrical activities. I thought my body just kind of grew that way. So in my practice of meditation, I've always felt this kink in my back. Sometimes it feels like a lump, sometimes it grows like out of control, and it's just this blockage that's always been there. But I always dismissed it. I always thought it was just like something natural. But with my therapist that I have now, we started doing some body work. Started to explore like our bodies, see if there's any blockages and anything. And every time I get into that one area in my back and I try to explore what's there, I'll like get angry and it'll ruin my week. I'll just like have a terrible week and be impatient and reactionary and angry or sad or something. So in this last meditation retreat that I did, I explored that area, and I realized that there's like a lot of stuff that's stored there, as you can imagine. And not only that, but it constricts my breathing. And it's so clear to me now that this is where my depression came from when I was growing up. Like for my whole like teenage life, I literally felt like I had this weight on my back, and I was so heavy, and it made me so tired and unmotivated. I didn't know how to enjoy life. And there was literally like some type of force in my back that was preventing me from breathing properly, from sleeping properly. And I had no idea. And I could see it like very clearly now.
Right.
I still don't know exactly where it comes from. You know, maybe this is just how my mind and body processes, you know, trauma or negative emotions, and it stores them there so I don't have to deal with them. Maybe it's ancestral trauma. You know, it's quite and this is also why like I sleep on my side. I'll sleep with my hand over my head. Because it's easier to breathe. And it's just all so clear now, which is a really exciting revelation, because now I know like what I need to work on. And I'm really excited to get into that journey and like really kind of heal myself on this really, really deep level. I'm going to start I'm looking for acupuncturist now. So I have an appointment next week. I'm going to see how that goes. But yeah, just hearing that, like, I don't know, do you have any feedback for me?
I mean, it sounds like somatic experiencing may be also something that you may want to look for in the near future. Because what the modality, like it does a few things, and body work is part of that whole suite. But one of the main things is you'll sit up and just find the most comfortable like 0 point position that you have, and you will just breathe and maybe close your eyes and start to do a body scan and feel into your body at the calmest level, and the way that the energy is flowing, the way that you're breathing, the way that the heat feels. And then once you have that imprinted, then maybe you'll do a small exercise where you're talking about a difficult conversation that you had, or something that was terrifying, or something that, whatever that difficult thing was. And then you'll visualize it, and at the time where it's happening, then you're going to ask yourself, well, what did I want to do? Like I'm having a conversation and it's getting really like hectic, and I'm going to be berated and told that I'm being like distant if I just stop the conversation. So I have to be there in the conversation. But in reality, I want to actually go out, walk out the door and leave, and then come back 10 minutes later. And because we have this big neocortex in our brains now that we've developed, all of the parts of our body and brain that would make us run, that fight or flight mechanism gets stuck. And so your body wants to get up and go out the door, and you can't. And so you visualize, or you actually will then get up and go out the door. And then you come back and you sit down, and then you breathe and you get yourself back to your 0 point. And because the brain can't tell the difference between the imagination and reality, it doesn't really matter whether you actually walk through the door or you just visualize it. But the visualizations become clearer and clearer and more impactful the more you do this process. And so you like basically catalog a whole bunch of difficult things, a whole bunch of things that you've been dealing with that could have happened long in the past or could have happened recently. And you work through them, and you find every single time what it is that your body wanted to do, whether you wanted to shout, whether you wanted to jump, whether you wanted to run, whether you wanted to fight, and you visualize that. And then you also do some other visualization, like, because there are times where we do have to curb our instinct. So what would make you feel safe under those circumstances? if you're this animal, this small prey animal, what type of animal could you be that would be safe? So I went from being this rabbit to being, I think it was a triceratops. And, I had the big shielding on my head and all the plates, and I could deal with the anger and the shouting with no problem. And so then in these confrontations, I was able to like sit into my triceratops, which, next time somebody asks me what my spirit animal is, maybe I know the answer. But so these processing through what your body needed to do or what your body wanted to do at the time then starts to become second nature through this practice. And then after a while, like your body just does it automatically.
Yeah.
And you don't have to necessarily return unless there's like something new or emergent that comes up. And so for me, that through that process of going through all these different experiences, I was able to clear that, but I don't know specifically which experience led to what. So it ends up being like just this aggregate practice. But again, it was only a couple months that we did that work.
This is very Buddhist, by the way, which is like very exciting to me. I have a very close connection with Buddhism. I was born Buddhist, in my family, but I never had a relationship with it until I found my own spiritual path, not until like my mid-20s is when I kind of really started down that path, I'd say. And that mind-body connection, how everything in the mind has a physical reaction. And perhaps, maybe not vice versa always, but there's definitely like that relationship there. And it's like very scientific, as I was saying.
Very much so, very much so. That's what got me so excited, is because I started, even before I got into Pacifica, I started reading these journal articles. I'm like, oh my God, why is there so much scientific evidence of this efficacy? And this is just considered to be adjunctive therapy. This is just considered to be the sideline that helps. It's not the side dish, it's the main course. And so because of that, and also I ran into a capoeirista in Malaysia, who's we met in, I think, either on the West Coast or in New York. His name is Pitchbull. He's from Grupo Senzala, which is actually the group that I started in for a couple of months before I met Mestre and we all became Batuki. But his ex-wife was the right-hand student of Roberto Freire, who created this modality called somaterapia in Brazil during the dictatorship. And it was this anarchistic communal cultural therapy modality based on the tenets of Capoeira Angola, but that looked at imaginal therapy, gestalt, as well as the aspects of like theater of the oppressed and pedagogy of the oppressed, all within this like bubble of physical movement and interaction and going out into nature. And so when I told him what I was working on, it was just like this conversation, because we bumped into each other in Malaysia. Like, what the hell are you doing here? It's like, no, what are you doing here? And I told him what I was doing. He's like, yo, I need to hook you up with my ex-wife. Like, those are the words he said. And I was like, is this some prize that I didn't know is winning? Why are you trying to hook me with your ex-wife? Are you trying to get her married off so that you don't have to pay alimony? What's going on? But he's like, no. He realized the way that I was reading what he said, and was like, no, she's what I explained is the right-hand student of Roberto Freire, and explains the whole methodology. And I'm like, this is exactly what I need to look at. And then that ended up kind of being the basis of, or the central scaffolding of my research when I was in grad school. And so I kind of started building my modality atop of, what the Freires and what Augusto Boal and Wilhelm Reich and all these people had built, but in a way that worked both within the context of my capoeira community and school, as well as the clinical environments that I was working in.
Yeah, and it's like so obvious how capoeira is so healing. Having this conversation, like you're just moving your body, working out all those kinks that have its like mental relationship. And it's so clear to me why it feels so good for me to do it. I don't know why, like it's so hard for me to get there sometimes, But
I mean, the things that are healing also are challenging, and we always have resistance to them, and resistance isn't always resistance, but it's also powerful to think of resistance as resistance, like in all cases, because then when we see it that way, then we can motivate ourselves to engage. But I think the problem with capoeira in general is that there is this laissez-faire attitude that a lot of capoeiristas have, that like, leave your bad energy outside the door. When you come inside, clear yourself, and we want you to be present here. And then, but one, you can't, because everything that's inside you comes into the door with you. So pretending that it's not there doesn't help. And then you see people lash out or act out in the hada, and sometimes it results in a stern talking to, or, you need to take care of each other, But rarely does it get into okay, so what's going on with you? Or what can, all right, I see what's happening now, and I just want you to breathe, and I want you to just do this movement when the person throws the attack. And I know the attack is scary and it feels uncomfortable because it's such a small space, but we're going to walk through it. And then, okay, now let's try it again. Okay, again, more smoothly. Okay, so now how does it feel? I see that you're breathing more calmly now. And just work through how the movement was affecting that person, and allow them to breathe and be present, because it's triggering. But if we don't deal with that trigger then and there, then whatever that action was or that occurrence was is going to maintain its power over that person. So I would rather have people bring their shit in, and then help them deal with it, both like on the training floor, as well as within like an actual clinical context.
I think it's also pretty rare for a capoeira teacher to relate to it in that way, movement in that way, and to see the mental and emotional motivations behind it. I've never seen that except for with you, to be honest. But it just makes total sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think also that's kind of why I went back to grad school, is like I was telling you before, I felt this responsibility, and part of it, of course, is the people-pleasing caretaker archetype that I have learned to fulfill. But it also became my superpower, and as I started pushing off the people-pleasing and learning how to create boundaries, it became a way that I was able to fill myself by filling other people, and connect in a way that was generative instead of extracting from myself. And then so I went back to schools because I wanted to have all the tools in my toolbox that I could use for my students and for my community. And it's not a cheap solution. It's not a solution that everybody needs to do. And luckily, the community at large has seen the work that I've done and has opened their arms to it, and has invited me into different places where I've been able to, make a difference or help people deal with issues that are not easy, and the solution's never going to be super pretty, but it's going to be a step forward.
Sure.
Wherein now you're able to walk forward by yourself and understand how you can create practices of resilience and safety, or bravery more so than safety, so that conflict can be constructive rather than destructive.
Yeah, and I think that from what I see, that just resonates with so many people. And you're in such high demand. You're traveling like all over the world. So that leads me to my next question, is like, what is your capoeira journey like now, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think like part of my whole question around capoeira has always been, because we hear the stories of Zumbi and Besouro Preto and all of these Robin Hood and William Tell type figures who, saved the community and protected the community against slavery and colonialism. and stories of pitched battles. But that's not what we're living through now. And yet this is a warrior art. So what is the next step? What is the next battle that capoeira has to address? And I think that battle is internal and social. And I think, seeing the way that Mestre Main has evolved over the past like 15 years, and other practitioners of the art, I think there's a greater understanding of this as being a really effective way of using capoeira, and people find their ways to get in. Not everybody is going to become a capoeirista therapist. But for me, I think one of the things that people want me for, and one of the things that I'm going to do either way, so if you invite me, get ready, is that I'm going to ask the awkward questions. And I'm going to start and spark the awkward conversations that we've been sweeping under the rug. And I'm going to stand up for people who are afraid to be canceled by admitting their faults, and try to get them support so that they can correct and be contributory to the culture and to the community. Because I think a lot of the reason that people don't fix their behaviors is because they're not willing to admit that there's something going on, and there's this annihilation anxiety that like, well, if I admit to it, then I've got to leave, then I've got to be excommunicated, then I'm a bad person in my entirety. I'm not just a complex person that has had things happen, that has done things, but has also done beautiful things. And so I'm going to find ways to hold that space. And I'm also going to find ways to centralize the complainant and people who have been harmed, and find ways to get them solvency and resiliency, and hopefully teach communities to do that on their own. And I think that's really where I see capoeira going. And through that, I think, because we're living in a post-pandemic, post-Me Too reality where a lot of things that were maybe innocuous, it's like even into the 60s and 70s, you have a woman with a PhD at a business meeting, and she's getting asked to get the coffee, right? But get into the 80s and 90s, fuck that, right? And I think so we have this trajectory of justice where people are being humanized, and we're realizing the value of every single human individual. And so all of our communities, be it martial arts, be it dance, be it skating, all of our communities need to find ways to be able to hold everybody's humanity through issues and into repair. Because if not, then everybody who fucks up on one little thing or two major things or whatever is going to get canceled. And these are some of the greatest knowledge holders in the community who understand that there's a responsibility, but don't quite know how to fulfill it.
Yeah.
And so we need to offer them that lifeline, so that, not to just simply forgive something that was done wrong, but so that they can make amends, and so that they can prove not only to the community, but prove to themselves that they are able to be functional and to be helpful, and to step into that role of leadership that they thought they were in already, but through whatever misdeeds realized that maybe they weren't. And then that allows for that cognitive dissonance to be settled finally. So I think that's what capoeira is doing and needs to do more of, and what all of our little cultural and social communities need to do a lot of. So I guess that's kind of where I'm going with it.
It's a very noble pursuit. I didn't really understand the extent of it till now. How has your kind of message evolved, and has it been received in all the places you've gone? Because, we just had this conversation earlier. You're like in a different city, in a different country, almost every week, or sometimes it feels like every week, or
it's different everywhere because the context is different. But I think like humanity is humanity, and people, like, you have issues and you have fuck ups and you have just of a different nature, and the way that people want to handle it locally is different. And so I think it kind of falls back to like the question that I never answered about my language orientation, and that is that, I speak 14 or 15 languages. I speak 10 conversationally, like from fluently and up to, well, I can plot through a conversation and be okay. And then there's about 4 or 5 or 6 that I can be polite in. I can make sure I don't starve, but you're not going to have any scintillating conversations out of me, but I will get fed at a restaurant.
That's all you need.
That's all I need, really. And that comes from, that at that young age, traveling around the Middle East and then back to the US, learning multiple dialects of Arabic, learning Tunisian Berber, and then learning Swahili, learning English, learning French, like all, from the age of like 1 until like 5, 6, and then continually learning Thai, starting to learn Japanese, and then in college, Korean, Italian, and then Mandarin in grad school, the first round.
Wow. Wait, what are all the languages?
Oh gosh.
I mean, you don't even, I wonder if you even realize what they are.
Arabic, English, French, and Japanese are the best ones. Then Thai, Korean, Italian, Mandarin, Spanish, Portuguese. So those are the conversational 10. And then the ones that I am really sloppy with, be Croatian, Indo-Malay, Farsi, Hebrew, and I guess I would put Cantonese there too.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah. So, yeah, I want to get into this language thing. Like, how do you learn so many languages? Like, what's the process?
This is gonna suck, because actually, the first time I was looking at grad schools, I wanted to study language acquisition. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a quantum physicist. So I know a lot about quantum physics, y'all. But I decided that I wanted to know how I learned languages and be able to teach people that. And so I was going to go into language acquisition research. Turns out that my ability has nothing to do with the method of acquisition, because I've learned in many different ways, but it's a developmental thing. So when we're learning our first languages, we have all these mirror neurons that help us to sponge up linguistic and social data and social cues, because our parents aren't teaching us anything directly. Maybe they're like, okay, say thank you, right? But in general, they're not teaching us grammar. They're not teaching us vocabulary. They may be teaching us certain behaviors, but we're still sponging all that in from just listening to them speak. What Krashen would have called the silent period. And that's because we have this neurology that allows us to just compile and model languages and then turn them into languages that we're able to behave or reproduce. But around 5 or 6, those neurons start to prune because we no longer need them, because we already have our native language. So, and then that process happens a lot developmentally, like certain parts of your brain start to prune because you're not needing them anymore, because all that knowledge is already, or the instinct or the ability to do whatever is there. But in some cases, if you continue to use it at the same level that you did when you, in my case, learning my native language, I kept learning different variations of my native language and other native languages of mine. So from Arabic to Berber to English to French, Swahili, nonstop. So my brain didn't have a time when it was like, okay, we're done learning our native language. It's like, it was like, okay, we keep going. And that pruning phase, I passed the pruning phase and still have all those neurons, or at least a large amount of them.
Let's see.
So it ends up that I can't teach anybody because I don't have a process. It's my neurobiology that allows me to do it.
I see. So you just kind of naturally pick up languages by being in those environments or immersing yourselves in those environments.
Exactly. So like the weirdest story, I don't know if it was 2012, but I think it was 2012, Chinese New Year. I'm part of this like performing troupe of Brazilian performers or Afro-Brazilian performers that go to Hong Kong to be in the Chinese New Year parade. And they had like these different performing troupes from different countries doing all these different things. It was amazing. It was like United Nations of different dance and movement acts. Like had French firemen who like walk with these ladders and they're able to climb and do all these crazy acrobatics on the ladders. It was insane.
Yeah.
So it's me, Alfred, Quetzal, Xingu. I don't think Muito was able to make it. I think Sochi was there. So there are a few batuqueros and some other sundry capoeiristas. They're samba dancers, they're Afro-Brazilian dancers, like in this whole troupe. And it was sponsored by Cathay Pacific Airlines. Back in that time, they were one of the only airlines in the region that had like these really big, elaborate entertainment systems, the gigantic screen and like all this content. And there's an educational section. So I get on the plane, I'm like, educational, it's there. And it's like, learn languages. And so open that. And there's only 2 languages, Korean, I'm like, I'm not going to Korea, and Cantonese, I'm going to Hong Kong. So let me do the Cantonese. So 10 hours over and over, I just go through this learn Cantonese thing, and I have a little notepad in my pocket. So I'm just like taking notes and repeating the lesson over and over and over again.
Wow.
And like talking to myself and trying to get pronunciations. And by the time I landed, so this is maybe 12, 13, 14 hours, not even that, something like that. Anyway, hours later, land in Hong Kong, start getting off the plane, and I'm able to like ask where the bathroom is and how far down is the immigration. Wow. And is there any food here? Are the restaurants closed? Like I'm able to have these simple conversations in Cantonese after like
10 hours.
10 hours.
Wow, that's like superhuman.
That's my record right there.
Holy shit! Can you say? Let's put you to the test.
Yes.
So let's go through them. Maybe like, I don't know what you should say. How about introduce yourself in? Let's go through the whole list.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be that. But let's just start with like. You know what? Actually, I don't even know your full name. And we've known each other for, I don't know, 10, 15 years or something. I don't even know your name.
Capoeira does that.
Just like whatever I know is good enough, basically. But let's introduce yourself with your full name in Arabic.
Okay. اسمي سيفناصر بن عمر إسماعيل. أنا من ديترويت وكمان من تونس في بلد تونس. أنا تونسي وأمريكي وكل حاجة.
Okay. I'm just going to read through some different questions that I had, and then let's hear it in English, obvious is fine, French, and then you could say it in French and then maybe do like a translation.
Okay.
So what's some advice you have for like balancing like work life or just all the different things going on?
C'est difficile parce que ça dépend. Si tu as beaucoup de problèmes dans le travail, il faut que tu laisses beaucoup de temps dans sa vie dans la maison. So if you've got a lot of problems or a lot of issues at work, I think it may be better to then start to try to create more time and space in your home life in order to create that balance, because sometimes at work we don't necessarily have the power to influence things as much there. So if we can create that.
Yeah. I understood that a little bit. I speak French a little bit. I used to be pretty fluent. a lot of Cambodians in France.
Oh yeah, that's true.
But yeah, I forgot most of it. What's this other one? French, Japanese. What does happiness mean to you?
幸せってな、そうだよね。なんか個人的に、こう、幸せという言葉って、なんか、こう、やっぱ毎回、前より、やっぱうまく、こう、まあ、上達するということが幸せと思うんですよ。だから、こう、なんていう、こう、いや、今幸せですっていうんじゃなくて、こういうやっぱプロセスがあって、で毎回もっと上手くなっていってるから、やっぱこういう、流れに乗ってるっていうことが幸せと思う。So it's one of my best things.
And what's the translation?
No, it's like happiness. That's a hard one because to me, it's not like I can say that there's this state that is happiness, but I do feel like if every time everything that happens, I'm improving or I'm finding like an increasing capacity or doing better each time, then going through that process of continual betterment or continual understanding, being in that process is happiness to me, rather than it being a state or a destination.
Okay. How about in Thai, what does success mean to you?
แล้วก็ไม่รู้มันเป็นคนดีที่อะไร I'm not even sure how to say world, but world ไม่ดีเป็นyeah, like being able to be a good person in a world that's bad, I think is success.
I see.
Because I think that's.
Let's hear you introduce yourself again, or maybe introduce like, what is your mom like? What kind of person is she in Korea?
우리 엄마는 아주 너무 좋은 사람이었는데 진짜로 설명 못 하는데 음식 시간 okay, it's breaking down now. But like, it's difficult to explain. But she was just a very giving person who, like, be it like money, time, food, always prioritized giving to us.
What's one of your most fondest capoeira memories, experiences in Portuguese?
Não foi uma coisa gostosa, mas uma coisa que me faz muito melhor no mundo de capoeira e também na minha vida, porque eu fui no evento do Mestre Preguiça em São Francisco. A minha mãe estava lá também. A galera do Raiz do Brasil, Mestre Halil Suleiman, estava lá também, alunos dele. Eu joguei com o Mestre Halil, nem sabendo que ele é. Eu joguei com ele e dei um pequenino martelo nas costas deles. Ele me quase matou, mas com gentileza, sem machucar, sem nada. Mas o aluno dele estava com muita raiva. Depois a gente tinha uma roda aberta e a gente jogaram. Ele parou de capoeira e começou uma briga, batendo, chutando. Eu falei, pô, eu vou parar a capoeira, usa meu Kung Fu. Foi uma briga. Então, não foi uma coisa alegre, mas uma coisa muito importante para saber que capoeira é uma luta e também que eu possa me controlar nessas coisas. Não é uma coisa que a coisa que outras pessoas fazem que me controlem. Que eu posso me controlar. So that is to say that it wasn't like a happy moment necessarily, but I think a really important moment that left an impression was that I went with my mom to Mr. Preguiç's event like over 20 years ago. And the folks from Capoeira de Brazil were there. Mr. Halil Suleiman was there. And I played him in like the beginning games. And I didn't know who he was. And we're playing, and I just did this little soft martello, but I caught him in the ribs. And then he completely destroyed me. But it was so beautiful and controlled, and like he didn't hurt me. He didn't like there was no lack of care whatsoever, but he completely destroyed me within the game.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, like. But one of his students took acceptance to it. And so later on, he called me to play, and we're playing, and all of a sudden we hole into the hada, and he just stands up and starts kicking me and punching me, and like it just becomes a full out brawl, and he stops doing capoeira, and he just like, it becomes a street fight for him. And so I was still fairly new to capoeira, and I was like, well, fuck, this is kung fu time. And so we just like are going at it, and it took like 8 people to pull us apart.
Wow. And then, you think of it so fondly.
Yo,
so
this was like one of the most important like moments in my capoeira life.
Yeah.
Because I started to understand capoeira as a martial art, but also started to understand that like in that moment, I had that choice to either be controlled by the circumstances or to control myself, and I was able to control myself. I defended myself, but I didn't go beyond what was necessary. Whereas if the other person like was carrying water that didn't need to be carried, and like just completely flipped his shit. And so that I understood how important and how valuable that self-control and learning that through the process of capoeira, and that this guy had been in capoeira for way longer than I had and just had not learned it. And so how devastating it can be when you don't learn that level of self-control through the art.
That kind of leads me to another question that I was thinking. What's an example of, especially since you were talking about your background of being unable to confront people and stand up for yourself, what's an example that stands out to you where you were able to stand up for yourself? And you picked the language this time.
Okay.
This will be the last one.
Vou continuar em português. Então, quando eu acabar com aquele reunião terapêutica, né? Não foi um encontro com alguém que uma briga ou qualquer coisa assim, mas eu estava no aeroporto esperando para minha avó, e eu vi uma gata, uma mulher muito gostosa. Eu falei, porra, ele tinha muita tatuagem no braço, lindas. Mas a ambiente dela foi uma coisa um pouco tóxica. Entendeu que as roupas que ela usava, as suas tatuagens, a sua maneira foi muito tóxica. Eu gostei, eu falei, pô, que gostosa. Mas nesse momento, primeira vez na minha vida, eu sabia que isso não é uma atração natural, foi uma reflexo com essas coisas tóxicas. Eu estava querendo a coisa tóxica. E nesse momento eu falei, esse não é eu, é minha trauma que está me chamando para ir com ela. Eu me parei, deixei ela passar na minha frente e não falava com ela, não. So after that retreat from male survivor, right? You know, heading back to home, I'm at the airport and I see this woman with these like tattoos, and she's like this beautiful vine tattoos on her arm, and I was just super attracted, and I wanted to talk to her, and I was just like, damn. And so I was about to, and then for the first time in my life, I felt like that this attraction wasn't just this natural attraction to her beauty, but that it was this attraction of this traumatized part of me to, like, because you could see kind of in the way that she dressed and the way that she carried herself, that, you know, like there's this roughness, this undealt with toxicity, where she had to like show off for the world in this both off-putting but yet what was to me attractive way, and realize that there's this traumatized part of me that seeks to recreate my trauma by being attracted to toxicity. And so for the first time I was able to feel that part of me and then make the decision to not follow up with the behavior that it wanted from me, which was to then like talk to her and chat her up. So I just like let her pass and kept it rolling.
That's interesting that that's the memory that you think of when from the question of what's an example of when you stood up for yourself?
Because I've had, you know, people who have been difficult to deal with, and people who have like been oppressive in the ways that they've dealt with me, and I've not been able to stand up to them. But in reality, that has always been me standing in my own way. And so as soon as I was able to get out of my own way, then it was easy to deal with other people. But it was always difficult to deal with my fucking self. So I think that's why that's actually the key thing that comes to mind. Yeah,
makes sense. So, I mean, there's so many other things to talk about. Well, one thing that I do want to do is kind of like go through some capoeira videos with you. Like, whenever I try to explain capoeira to somebody, I'll just pull up like a YouTube video or something because it's so hard to explain. But there's also so much variation and so much nuances to it. So I wanted to like, I picked some videos that I just browsed on YouTube that I wanted to show you and just see what you think of them. Maybe you could tell me what's going on.
Cool.
And then if you have any examples that you want to show, we could do like a mini YouTube session. And hopefully, like, I don't know how this is going to work, like in terms of permission or licensing or whatever, but I don't know. I think it'll be okay.
I mean, they're all like, most of the capoeira videos online are like copies of copies of copies. And it's like the only reason they're there is because of fair use. So I think it'll be fine for the most part.
While I pull this up, is there anything that like you have going on or anything particular that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've been, doing a lot of traveling and a lot of visiting of other groups. But, now I'm back home, and it's summer, so, a lot of students are traveling, but it allows me to kind of be more centered and start, rebuilding. So I'm hoping that through this year, I'm able to start kind of building larger mass and sustainability so that we can start doing more impactful events. Because I think that's one of the ways that we're able to impact the community, is just bringing them into our house and showing how we run things. And, if people enjoy it, then they may take some of those things home with them and implement them in ways that work for them.
Is there any resource that we could point people to that people could keep up with what you're doing or what's going on with capoeira, or any of your any stuff that you got going on?
I mean, the Tenjogu Instagram is there. That's for the group, and also my personal Instagram.
Okay.
Also, thewarriorclass.org is my therapeutic site. And I have a framework there called Safe Schools. And it's a framework that I've developed in a transformational justice context that I've been able to use successfully to work with capoeira schools to kind of deal with issues and create resiliency. But if you're able to kind of start creating those practices in your group, creating a culture of communication, creating more democratization and flattening of the power structure, then you're able to start creating safety before something happens rather than it being a reactive thing. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing is there. And I ask people to just to take a look at it and see if there are any parts that would help them be in a better place, in a more resilient space in their school. And if they want help implementing something, then I will definitely help. But it's put out there. So just check out that website, thewarriorclass.org.
Thewarriorclass.org.
And I think that's definitely a good starting point.
Yeah, sounds cool. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. I was unfamiliar with all that. Also, I'm definitely going to rewatch this and look into some of the somatic, what is it called?
Somatic experiencing.
Somatic experiencing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much great stuff that we've talked about. So this is the first thing that pops up in my YouTube feed when I search capoeira. Can you take a look at this and let me know what you think, what you think is going on?
So this is probably a school in Bahia, but I'm not sure. But there's so many different ways of playing capoeira, and this is more of a contemporary Baiano style. There's a lot of the acrobatics, a lot of speed. The game isn't necessarily all in close, but you can see the understanding of flow and of danger and escaping danger. It's very powerful, but people are taking care not to knock each other out. It's very fun, kind of open games, Capoeira Baiana.
Cool. What about this game? What's going on here?
Okay, so this is Miudinho. It is a style that Mestre Suassuna created with some of his students in order to create a game that was, really powerful and expressive and energetic, but that also was not violent. Because if anybody knows, the old school CDO, they were fighters. They were the folks who sometimes would test their capoeira by getting into fights in bars and in the street. Just that Cobra Kai kind of thing that a lot of martial artists do in order to prove themselves. And the master was it does not make sense for my students to be picking each other apart all the time. It doesn't leave space to invite people in who don't want to have that lifestyle. And so Miudinho became kind of the core of the CDO style and his influence. Just the same way that the Senzala way of, or style of play has influenced a lot of contemporary capoeira. Miudinho has influenced a lot of the way that people play.
I didn't know this was Miudinho. That's actually one of my next videos. I love this guy. It's called Miudinho Capoeira at the beach.
Yeah, all the bendy, twisty, like I think of it, and I haven't spoken to Mestre Susuna about this, but I've spoken to a lot of his students, and it's very much similar to like a jogo de dentro, but without the objective of tricking your opponent and smacking them in the face. You're really trying to flow, and so you have a lot of like inverted escapes where you're escaping into the kick, but at a different level, and that makes it an escape. Whereas in a jogo de dentro game, that would be considered suicide.
I couldn't find too many aggressive games, but I didn't search very thoroughly, to be honest. These are just like some things that I skimmed through. Unless there's those capoeira in MMA videos.
If you like just search for Muzenza Fight, you'll find some.
Muzenza?
Muzenza Fight. Yeah.
This guy.
Because they had fighting tournaments, and I think they may still have them.
This looks like a compilation. Like this?
Yeah.
What are the rules in these competitions?
Every tournament, like organization, has their own rules. So I'm not really sure what the Muzenza rules were, but it's
like, I assume there's something preventing them from just taking them down and turning it into like jiu-jitsu or something.
So yeah, they're not a group that does capoeira. There are groups that do, but yeah, as I've seen, like I've seen carrinhos in their tournaments where like you just pick someone up and like slam them on the ground, but never grappling on the ground.
Like, where's the line where? I guess that's what capoeira is. It's like the line is there is like no line. It's
There's
just
no
like,
line, and yet there is a line
between the fight and the dance. Yeah.
Yeah.
The fight and the art, or the art of it all, I suppose. Going for a takedown.
But it's interesting because like for me, like you see the speed and the strength of the kicks and the attacks, and they're like, it's very powerful. Like in the ring, like at close range, you get hit by something like that, and it's lights out. And people like Marco Aurelio and Tadarius Thomas have proven that efficacy in the ring and in the octagon. But at the same time, when you see it, especially in these tournaments, a lot of these kicks and a lot of these attacks are coming from a long range. And so the person just sees it coming, and then they're going to deal with it in the best way that they're going to deal with it. Whereas the classical forms of capoeira, be it capoeira regional or capoeira Angola, are about tricking the person so they don't see the attack coming.
Right.
And so I've always wondered what it would be like to see a Capoeira Angola fighting tournament or a Capoeira Regional fighting tournament. But at the same time, I know that those techniques, they come out of nowhere. And if they work, you're escaping right into the kick. And so the physical damage would be really, really bad.
Also, like, that's not the music that they would be having.
No,
which is a big part of it, I feel. So I'm curious to see like
they usually have a bateria they're playing, but I think
this is also not it.
And so this is not a tournament as far as I know, but it's just a rough roda.
With some very interesting music.
Very interesting music.
Well, speaking of Angola, I had this video over here. Like, what's going on here?
Okay, so
I'll move up.
This is Mestre Claudio's group. So you see the full bateria.
Are these hats very Angola?
They're very much this group. Like kind of every group has its own proclivities and peculiarities, and I think like even more than Akane, Anglais du Sertão, like they have a very specific aesthetic that comes down to even like parts of their clothing that are not their uniform. But like very in close, like very similar to Miudinho as far as like a lot of bendy twisty, but there's never, well, there was kind of an escape into the attack, right? But it was at a different level, but not where you're opening up your face and your chin to the possibility of a foot coming down on it.
Do you ever get tired of capoeira?
No, there's so many variations, and I think that's also why I love our group and our group's philosophy around it, because Mestre Main has never been concerned about teaching a specific style, but allowing us to learn as much as possible and learn to do what works for our bodies, but also learning how to play to all these different games, and working within all these different traditions so that you can go to any hada and enjoy yourself.
But all the teaching, all the traveling, you know, does it ever wear you out?
Yeah, sometimes. Like I definitely have to, like capoeira is not a sport anymore. It's a job, and it's not a bad thing. And it's something that I chose. You know, at certain times I was called for it, but you know, each day I continued to make that choice to continue on that path, because I didn't have to start a school or accept you know, remote students or any of that. But the influence and dynamic changes that have occurred in my life, so much of them have happened either because of or in the context of capoeira. And so it's a context that I want to keep alive, and I want to also like have an effect on, because you know, there's also things in the context that you know, have happened that are mishaps, let's say. And so to have the power and the position to make sure that the next generation doesn't have to deal with the same types of things that we've had to deal with, or at least are able to find better resolutions than we were able to find, is I think part of what I want to do. Yeah, I think I have so much respect for you and for your commitment to capoeira, and anybody that can commit themselves to an art so wholeheartedly and just dedicate all of their time and energy into something I think deserves respect, and is something that I strive to implement in aspects of my own life as well. Word. I mean, I don't think everybody needs to be at that same level of commitment, but I think that's also part of my commitment, is that you know, anybody can get in at the level that they're comfortable with, that functions for them. Capoeira shouldn't be like a mandate in their life that makes things difficult, but that should be a release valve, a place where they can find that recuperating space and that recovery, which sometimes is difficult because we ourselves don't want that or have resistance. Yeah. But, let's see what else we got. I got one last link. Oh, it's IG. What do you think? What's going on in this game? So, yeah, this is like it's an interesting style of play that we're seeing a lot in like Israeli CDO. And like there's definitely like this fast attacking, sometimes at a distance, sometimes in close, but there's also this leeway. And what some of the Israeli capoeiristas have told me about capoeira for them was that they have this this ethos of potential violence in their lives. And so for them, capoeira was an escape. And that's why so many of them are great aerialists and just like amazing acrobats and flying and that physical freedom was the thing for them rather than the fight. So like you see all these like near misses, but nobody's really trying to hit each other. And like the big thing is not the strike, but is the takedown, which is, really part of the capoeira ethos in general. But, in Mesa Main's era, you had people knocking each other out.
Yeah.
Today, we don't necessarily have that. And I don't think we need that, but it's definitely a very specific take and an application.
Cool.
Almost like, I don't want to say it's an escapism, but it's been described in a sense as an escapist way of dealing with a reality, or I would rather say an interpretation of reality. Yeah.
Do you have any? That's my whole list. But do you have any other videos or any other things about capoeira that you like to share, or to give people an idea of like the whole scope, or other styles or other perspectives?
If you maybe look up in YouTube, maybe Movimento Novo. So I like all the styles of capoeira and all the different ways of playing. I kind of see them as
this guy up here.
Yeah. So like any style or even any specific martial art has its cultural antecedents that make it the way that it is. And so it can be a regional difference. It can be, who's doing it. And in this way, like the Movimento Novo thing was about trying to get people together past the boundaries of groups and rank. And so, there are no uniforms, no insignias, no expressions of rank. So you never know who you're playing, and there's not any specific style. And so the style of play that ends up coming out of it is like this. It's definitely very Angola. Maybe because the bateria is, maybe because, Baramay is very influenced by Capoeira Angola and is very much a student of it. But also, it's alive, and you can go from, and this is to me, this is part of Capoeira Angola. It can go from being slow and just smooth to being viciously rapid. And you'll see he does a lot of like repeat takes and playbacks when somebody gets taken down that just make the videos fun to watch. But I really like this way of playing. It's not going slow just to go slow, but to really work the strategy of the game. And then when that thing happens, it's just so alive and so impactful.
It's very intentional.
It's very intentional, very intentional, very focused, very objective.
Yeah, man, I go through my phases, sometimes I want to immerse myself in it. Sometimes I need to take a break. I'm a little bit in the latter category lately, but it definitely, definitely has a very special place in my heart.
I think that's a healthy way of approaching it. I think we used to have this thing of, if you want to progress, then you've got to train like 4 days a week, and you've got to and it was oppressive. And I think people still have that in their heads. So I think sometimes people don't want to do capoeira because they feel like they have to make this super consistent, hyper consistent commitment to it if they're going to do it. because that's what the last generation did. But it doesn't have to be that way. And if you can think about it as, you know, I'm taking a little break, I'm not gone, I'm just doing other things in my life, then it's perfect, because it's that balance. It should be a part of the puzzle. Yeah. It doesn't have to be your whole existence.
Yeah, I always used to feel bad about it whenever I go through like these little phases, though. So it's like nice to hear you say that.
Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't feel, because I know that you're going to come back, and like the phase could last a month, it could last whatever, but that you're going to come back, and in a lot of cases, like there's going to be something new in your capoeira that was cooking at the time that you were away from the training, and so like even those breaks are part of the training and part of your growth, like in your skill. Once
I get this kink out of my back, I'm going to be a whole new person.
Yo, it's going to be different. It's going to be different.
That's kind of my mission. And I can feel it, you know, like I've had these moments in my life where I feel like just so magnetic, like everything like is like happening in my favor, or like I could just feel the energy, you know, and it's been really hard for me to like tap into that.
Yeah.
You know, and to just be there consistently, like it. And that's what I think that's what I'm like really trying to work on. It's finding that place where I really feel like I'm living to my fullest potential every day. Do you feel that way?
I don't know. I think, I think I'm pretty happy that I'm alive. Because I know I'm always going to fuck up. I think my ability to admit that I'm not doing things as well, or doing things in as conducive a way at times, growing that acceptance, growing that ability to admit it, and in some cases fix it, and in other cases not give a fuck, has been like really great for me. So it's not so much being about the optimization, but being about the acceptance, and like if somebody needs to call me on something, and then I can be like, yeah, you're fucking right, I did that. And if nobody needs to call me on something, if it's not affecting anybody, it's just my lazy ass being a lazy ass, then sometimes I just need to be a lazy ass. And that's also okay.
Well, thank you so much for doing this interview. I feel like I learned so much, and I'm gonna like rewatch like a lot of these elements for sure. And thank you. I mean, I feel like it's like anytime I especially like a long form like talk like this, and it was just so meandering through so much of my history and my psyche, that I think I learned a lot and gained a lot of perspective, looking at different things in relation to other things that I might not have really looked at in that way. So. Yeah, and there's stuff that we didn't talk about that I have questions of, but I just kind of went with the flow of what we were talking about. But maybe sometime down the line we could do another one.
Yeah.
Like we'll see.
Word. But thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, we could cut it there.
All right, bet.
I think it's been like 2.5 hours.
Yo, nice.
Sick. All right.